Serious, what was the closest you've ever been to killing someone? Nurse here. Unit was very busy, and I mentioned to a patient we needed to start her on antibiotics. Patient consented. I hung penicillin, only to find out our computer said she's anaphylactic allergic to penicillin. Incredibly, she must have outgrown her childhood allergy. Beat myself up for a long time for that near miss. Won't make that mistake again. When I was 15, I carried my 2-year-old cousin down a flight of stairs when I tripped and we fell down 3 steps. She fell on the back of her head and I on top of her. It took a split second before she started crying and I thought she was dead. Thankfully, she was fine, but I'm so glad she didn't fall harder or over the handrail, or else she would have fallen at least 3 meters and would probably be dead. When my younger sister was in middle school, she took a very sudden and unexplained dip in personality. She went from being a bouncy sunny kid who loved going outside and seeing her friends to kind of reserved and struggling to keep her grades up. Her friends stopped coming around, crazy rumors about her started, and she was just overall really depressed and nervous. Our parents were very into the just suck it up mentality, so they told her to just push through and be better. I tried to get her to tell me what had happened, and she told me the same thing she told our parents, that kids at school were bullying her, and her friends were being mean. I didn't buy it, but there was nothing I could do. One day at the dinner table, we were all talking about town gossip as was family custom, and my mom brought up how a teacher at my sister's school was looking for a hand in getting rid of some old furniture from his late father's house, and that my mother had volunteered the family to help out that coming weekend. My sister immediately broke down into having sobs, howling at the top of her lungs, as though someone had died, and you can probably guess where it went from there. She confessed that her teacher's son, who was a sophomore when my sister was in 7th grade, had assaulted her, and when she tried to tell the teacher about it, he shut her down and called her a liar and had said he would fail her if she tried to tell anyone about it. I had to spend the following day in class with this asshole while my parents sorted out how to handle the situation, and it took everything I had not to lose my shit on this kid. I'm not a violent person, but I had to sit there with him a foot away and all I could think about was smashing his face into the tile until the light left his eyes. That was over 10 years ago, and he's in jail now, but I still think I'd have to contain myself if I was in the same room as him again. Driving tired once, had a micro sleep, and woke up driving down the wrong side of the road. Fortunately it was late at night, no traffic around, but could easily have killed myself and my passenger. Never driven tired since. My mum was dying in hospice. It wasn't dignified, and she was in a lot of pain, but she was still lucid. I asked her if she wanted me to help her speed things up. For context, she was a nurse before she got sick, and I knew what I could do to make things happen. She told me she wished I could, but didn't want me to get in trouble or go to jail. We laughed about it a little bit. I maintained I would have a ball in jail. She died later that week. I spent most of it by her side. I'm 100% pro-assisted euthanasia. Watching her go was torturous. Had a patient who was essentially a vegetable. I had to wrestle with him and keep him pinned to the bed. Most of his muscles had contractions, but he was still shaking and stuff due to the pain we were probably inflicting on him, while the nurse pumped fluids out of his lung through a hole in his neck. This guy's entire existence was just lying in bed being in pain, semi-choking on the fluids his body was producing inside his lungs, only to be pinned down, have us remove the worst parts of it, and the cycle to begin anew every hour or so. It was heartbreaking. This was not healthcare, this was torture. It would have been more humane to let him die. I felt ashamed and still do, because I could not bring myself to kill the man. Mom was in an abusive relationship for about 8 years. About 6 years into it, me and my ex stopped by to pick mom up as she said the guy was drunk and she wanted to leave. We arrive, and as I approach the front steps I look up into the glass door and see a pair of hands shove my mother out of view. She went fucking flying. I raged out, grabbed an axe that was nearby, Jude would chop trees on property and sell bundled firewood as the guy stepped out front and downstairs. I chased him around the perimeter of the property whilst almost blacked out in anger. A buddy of his who was staying there temporarily was on the side of the house smoking a cigarette and tackled me. Luckily, the axe didn't penetrate my chest seeing as I landed face down with the axe pinned against me. Cold been all types of messy in 2 ways. Fast forward about 2 years and abusive guy gets into car wreck and passes away about 2 months after I got into car wreck on same street in a similar truck and walked away with cuts and bruises. When I was 13 years old I was living in a group home. The boys in the group home were never allowed to go upstairs where the girls' dorms were. I was the only girl who left each day for public school. Everyone else went to school in the basement. Every day, as I would be the only one upstairs getting ready, this one guy snuck up the stairs and forced himself upon me. I told one of the house parents and she laughed at me. After a month of this I snapped. I stood on top of my bed listening as his footsteps got closer. As soon as he walked into my room I lunged at him. I wrapped my hands around his throat. As soon as he hit the ground everyone in the group home came running to see what that sound was. It took several people to pry my hands off that guy's throat. I was arrested and originally charged with attempted murder. Luckily that kid confessed to raping me repeatedly. I was still charged with assault and battery though. I spent 2 months in juvenile detention. I was also given 6 months of house arrest and 6 months of probation. Working at a fast food shop, my friend who was very allergic to peanuts asked for our shop's version of the blizzard. I joked, "You want that with peanut butter cup, right?" Haha, we both chuckled. He said no and asked for cookie dough. For some unspeakable reason, no a single clue why, I made it with cookie dough and peanut butter cups. Handed it to him without a second thought. He brought it back like a minute later and said he thinks he saw peanut butter cup in it, and sure enough, my dumb teenage ass put this man's lethal death poison in his ice cream. I apologized 100 times. He said it wasn't a big deal. I lived with that anxiety causing thought for a while. Grandma got moved to a real shady nursing home. Her concierge doctor who she paid $3,000 a year to specifically stay a patient have refused to go anywhere except this one nursing home. It was an old piece of shit. First day go to visit her and she is covered in shit and piss. Not one person came to check on her or answered her buzzers. They dropped her day 2 and she had to go to hospital. Go to her room to pick up stuff and found a nurse in her chair eating all her food. Day later family was visiting and said her TV was missing and they replaced it with some ghetto small one. I rushed right over and I was like, if they robbed her on top of this, I'm going to kill these goddamned nurses. Turns out the TV was fine and people were just hyped up and over suspicious. The bad nurses did get fired and grandma had an okay time there. I mean it's a nursing home. They are all pretty much shit. My cousin wanted to show off his new bow with real arrows to me. I was 4 years old at the time and had no motor skills, obviously. He figured out it was dangerous giving weapons to a 4-year-old. However, way too late as I was ready to shoot, he shouted, "Caution, it's dangerous." Me, being the idiot kid, turns around to look at the person talking to me and accidentally release the arrow. He describes the arrow grazing his eyebrow so closely he could feel the wind of it. 1 centimeter more and I would have shot him right in the eye. I wasn't allowed to borrow any toys from him for years. My older brother, it was after my mother had passed away. I was working 3 jobs so that my older brother and 2 younger brothers could carry on studying and make something of themselves. 4 years and I find out instead of him paying the bills, I was giving him more than enough for all the bills. With the money I was giving him, it was not enough. He was taking out debt on my name. Turned out after 4 years of working 3 jobs non-stop, I was in about 100k debt with no money left in my bank account. The only reason he did not die that day was too many people got in the way. I didn't want to hurt anyone other than that trash of a shit. I had started a grease fire in a pot on the stove while cooking for a date. Panic set in as it was kind of big fire. Only thing I could think of was baking soda would be the only thing to put it out, because that's what they taught us in school, right? Ransacked my cupboards, couldn't find it. Next best thing that came to mind, dirt from outside. Ran outside to get some dirt. Told her not to pour water on it, that I'll be right back. As I'm out there I hear her scream and a flash of orange. My heart sank and I froze for a second. Did I just kill my date? Back inside, she's fine. Fire is smaller but still going. My walls and ceiling are scorched. I ask her what happened. She replied, she poured milk on the fire because milk is thicker than water. Okay. Anyway, no one was harmed in all this thankfully. Except my bank account, when my security deposit didn't cover the damages done when I moved out later. Oh well. I do have more fire stories from that apartment. Pretty sure my landlord thought I was an arsonist, or a dumb kid on his first time living alone, pretending to be an adult. After months of living with a narcissistic, vile, evil to the core grandmother who also never drew breath, spoke constantly, dribbled shit non-stop, and it was a small house so there was no getting away from it, I found out among many other things she had been talking really horrible things about me behind my back. Anyway, one day it all just became too much to handle when she would not stop talking and talking about nothing, and I just wanted a moment of peace. So I got up and walked to the kitchen, and she started yelling out to me from the lounge, and I stood in the kitchen, hands on the sink, eyes closed, for probably 5 minutes with her voice echoing in the background. Eventually I picked up a knife and I'll be honest, I was going to kill her, no doubt in my mind. Only thing that stopped me was the idea of wasting my life in prison for someone like her. So I put the knife down, took a few deep breaths, and walked back into the lunch room. I know it's not a great look for me, but please, don't envision a sweet old lady sitting in a rocky chair just wanting to talk. No. She is still to this day the worst person I have ever met. She is toxic on a fundamental level. She just sends people to their absolute limits. Got bullied for nearly 8 years at school, and at home and outside of home and after school. No one would help, teachers would ignore it, because I had no proof. Other students would join in or not say anything for fear of getting targeted. Almost killed myself twice in that time if that counts. If it doesn't, I also brought a cleaver to school that was about 1 kilogram or so heavy and maybe 40 centimeters long, and was fucking big, but it fit my backpack fine. At the school gate I said in my head, if I crossed the line onto the school grounds I would take the cleaver out and kill the head bully, and I wouldn't stop until it's done. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but was most likely just a minute or two. In the end I didn't want to hurt anyone, especially not kill anyone, even someone as horrible and sick as him. I just wanted to not be abused, to have friends. I just wanted for life not to feel like a living hell. I started crying, skipped school again to avoid the bullying and me doing something bad, and went into the woods that weren't that far from school. I buried the cleaver and pretended I didn't know where it was when my also abusive stepfather asked later that day in a drunken rage where his fucking cleaver was. Life was horrible, and I wished for everything just to end so many times, but I held on, and once I finished school and left the abusive household behind, my life improved. I'd like to think that I'm not only well adjusted today, but a generally kind person that just wants to be happy without hurting anyone. I'm happy now. In high school I caught a special earful from one of my bullies and he embarrassed me in front of our entire class, and I swear I could have choked the life out of him and not changed a shade. But life is a funny thing and the way things work out are funny. We are now best friends, 12 years later, and we talk on the phone at least twice a week for an hour minimum. I just sent them for a meme for crying out loud. Funny how things work out. I'm a truck driver, been doing it for almost 11 years now. I've had 8 or so incidents of cars pulling out in front of me or cutting me off on the freeway where, if I hadn't been able to brake in time, they'd be road burger. Once I was driving 50 miles per hour under the freeway when a car came down the off-ramp and just pulled out in front of me. I thought my truck would do a forward somersault, I was braking so hard. I weighed around 16,000 kilos at the time, 35,000 lbs. I was less than a car length from slamming into the back of her tiny Citroen. After slowing down I laid on the horn and flashed my high beams to no avail. She just kept driving. So I followed her for a few miles until she pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store, parked and got out, and opened her passenger side door and yelled at her. I asked her if my truck was hard to see since it's huge and bright green, and what the hell she was thinking. I didn't think you were going that fast. I thought I had time to pull out. Man. I told her she was a fucking idiot and I asked her what she thought would happen if I ran into the back of her car. I don't know. What? Me? You go to the morgue and I have to fill out paperwork. Then I slammed the door of her car shut so hard I thought it was going to bounce off, stomped back to my truck and drove back to the garage. What's the funniest thing you've seen someone get fired for? Cook next door to another restaurant. Knew the day cook. He was unstable. So, lunch rush. A customer sends a steak back. Not done enough. Sends it back again. Too done. Customer gets a new steak and sends it back again. The cook grabs the steak off the plate and throws it across the crowded restaurant and hits the customer sitting, so help me, 40 feet away, in the head. Yep, he got fired. I used to fire a lot of people. Here are some of my favorites, in no particular order. Ship's mast. Two 18-year-old kids decided to play ship's mast in the company parking lot during the 15-minute break. There were about 200 people in the parking lot, on top of security cameras. The kids were zipping through a 5 miles per hour posted parking lot at 45 miles per hour, playing ship's mast. They were genuinely surprised when I fired them an hour later. Lunch thief. After several days of various employees reporting lunch theft, I tasked our security team with the horribly boring duty of monitoring the camera pointing at the lunch fridges. At the end of the day they provided me with footage of the thief in action. This dude wasn't just stealing lunches, this dude was stealing shit every various lunches to make his own. He would wait for the shift to start, sneak off to the bathroom, dip into the break room, and raid the fridges. He would spend 10 to 15 minutes picking through various lunch bags, finding the things he wanted, and then he went outside to eat, all while on the clock. The day I fired him, I went outside for a smoke and saw him sitting at the end of the building eating stolen lunches while still on the clock. I walk over to him and make chit chat, knowing full well who he is and that I'm going to be firing him in less than an hour. He says to me, "Hey, did they ever catch that guy who was stealing lunches? That shit is pretty fucked up. Someone stole my lunch too. Fucking sociopath." It felt good to fire that piece of shit. Fired for pooping. One of my area leaders came to me with a complaint about one of her team members who was taking longer and longer bathroom breaks each day. Once again, I tasked the security team to keep the camera aimed at the bathroom entrance so we could clock his coming/going. The first day was 25 minutes, the second day was 37, and the third day was 75 minutes. Turns out the guy had been stealing cans of compressed air from the supply closet and was spending his workday in the bathroom huffing them in a stall. After an hour of knocking, I had to kick the door in to find him blue in the face and passed out near dead on the toilet. EMS resuscitated him just in time for me to fire his ass. He tried to sue us for firing him for pooping. I work in the restaurant industry. I have fired someone for having sex with a woman who I had called a cab for because she was too drunk. The bartender saw that she was fucked up and dragged her to the men's room. He was on the clock. My boss hired him back 2 days later. He didn't think it was that serious. I quit soon thereafter. Dude was changing his clothes every day in the computer storeroom to go work out. So a coworker came in and saw a stark naked guy where there oughtn't be one. Stark naked guy laughs and throws his pants in his coworker's face. That was his last day. I was the overpass manager for a call center for a while. I had to terminate an employee for looking at porn on the work computers. He came back the next day threatening to sue the company for discrimination, claiming I fired him for being gay. I had to sit in an office with 2 grown adults, the ex-employee and the HR director, and explain that I fired him for looking at porn on a work computer. The gayness of the porn didn't factor into the decision. I work at a big social network company. There was this married couple who used to work here. Husband decides to look into wife's private information to check if she had cheated. Got fired. Now wife decides to look into husband's private work profile to see why he got fired. Got fired. We take privacy seriously, folks. Used to give a guy a ride to work in the morning, and sometimes when I went to pick him up, he'd still be drinking from the night before. One day, he passed out in my car and I couldn't wake him when we got there, so I went in and told one of the other guys that I thought was his friend. Nope. That guy went straight to the boss. The boss woke him and took him home and fired him on the way. Wasn't that funny but more unbelievable? When I worked at a grocery store for my first job, We had an employee get fired for stealing around $14,000 worth of groceries. Don't know if they ever pressed charges though. He worked the closing shift, so he would stash what he wanted in the back where there weren't cameras, bring it up in a box when we closed, act like he paid for it earlier, even brandishing a receipt. He would only pay for 2 or 3 of the items, then walk out with the rest later. This continued for a long time, until they installed new security cameras. I still can't believe he got away with it for so long. I used to work at a call center with a guys, let's call him Kevin, that was around 35 to 40 years old, and was of the awkward type, you know, constantly telling you a boring story about his weekend, the kind you can read on r/fathappened, or just trying to attract attention, to make some new friends without it being really effective. When you work in a call center, there are some time in the evening when you don't receive a single call for a while, so you don't have anything else to do but talk, Reddit, or annoy your neighbors. Kevin and colleague, let's call her Josie, were usually screwing around and joking back and forth. One night, Josie retorts to something Kevin says with "bite me." So Kevin does. Josie, totally shocked that he did, but being pretty damn cool about shit, didn't say anything to anyone about it. However, Kevin the next day brags to our supervisor about how he bit Josie. So, supervisor asks Josie about it, gets confirmation and gets hours, proceeds to nuke Kevin's ass out. I got fired from a job at Arby's when I was a teenager while I was quitting. I had worked there about a week and decided it really sucked balls. So I went into the manager's office before my next shift to quit. I started with, "Hi, can we talk? I don't think this job is for me." I don't know if this manager was already having a bad day, but she suddenly got pissed. Her face turned a bit red, and she snapped, "Turn in your shirt and die. Bitch. Just get out of here. You're fired." So I walked out of her office, a bit stunned. Turned my stuff in at the admin building for the company that ran the chain. All in all, a pretty weird experience. A girl called in sick, so the boss asks for a doctor's note. The girl gives a doctor's note. Turns out the girl just got one from Google Images or something like that, with an address from New York. We worked in Texas. I didn't see it, but heard about it. The manager of the store where my friend used to work at was fired for forgetting to turn in bank deposits. He had several days worth of deposits in his car. He put them in his car and forgot about them. At my very first job, I worked in a very old fast food place. We had an auditor come in, and I was doing portion preps when the auditor walked by and a piece of the ceiling fell into my food tray. Manager got canned after that. While I was in the Navy, 2 friends of mine got fired for stealing a fishing boat and crashing it. We were stationed in Sasebo, Japan, and were out drinking and hanging out at this local beach. My friend Dutch was already pretty wasted when he came up to a group of us, giggling to himself. He said that he and another guy were going to take a boat out. We thought he meant some of the small kayaks that were on the beach. What he actually meant was a full-size Japanese fishing trawler down the beach a ways at a dock. So this big trawler fired up and sped off across the inlet and slammed into the rocks. We were all staring at it wondering what the hell just happened. Not long after, the Japanese police showed up and found Dutch and the other guy passed out on the boat. Those 2 geniuses got arrested. And just their luck, they got arrested right before Golden Week, a time when everything shuts down for a bunch of holidays in Japan. And since the command was not too happy about the whole situation, they got to sit in jail for over 2 weeks. Needless to say, they got canned. The Navy bought a brand new boat to replace the damaged one. I was fired because my boyfriend at the time hugged me on shift. I was walking to the break room down the employee hall, and he was leaving it, and he sort of hugged me. I pushed him away and told him not to do that at work. I was later fired, citing it as inappropriate workplace behavior. He was not fired and worked there for several more years. When I was 16 or so, I had a job stacking shelves in a supermarket. There was a phantom person stealing chocolate yogurts, always empty tubs in the bins in the changing rooms, tills didn't add up etc. Some bloke about 30 came back to the shop floor after a toilet break with chocolate mousse on the tip of his nose. Turned out he forgot to bring a spoon that day, and after licking out the pot didn't wipe his face. After admitting it, he was fired on the spot. I knew a dude who was working at Microsoft. They have a very nice company store where you can buy their products at a huge discount. This was around the time when the Xbox first came out. He was buying all the millisecond Xbox games at the company store and returning them to various retail stores to get an on-MS game. His goal was to get every game made for the Xbox, and he wasn't quiet about it. It got to the point where stores would no longer accept his returns. Someone finally had enough and was sick of the abuse and hearing about it. As soon as the managers found out, he was sacked. On Christmas Eve, everyone clapped when he was escorted out. I still laugh thinking about him telling his wife about losing a dream job because he wanted to game the system. He had kids too. I had a boss who was so obese that he would fall asleep in meetings. After 5 months of him dozing off at the conference table, they fired him. The reason it's funny is that he really should have been fired the first time he told a colleague that it was good to see her on her knees, or that time he emailed me a nude picture of a fat man covering his face, implying that the picture was of himself. But you know, that stuff seemed to be fine. It was just the sleeping that ticked the seer off. I worked at apps and was in management. My Skittles got stuck in the vending machine, so I started shaking it, like in high school. It didn't work, so I started putting my shoulder into the machine and eventually smashed through the glass in front of about 40 to 50 other employees. Getting walked out was awkward AF. Oh, I have one. I worked for a very large internet failure in around 2000. Things were starting to go to shit within the company, but it was at that stage where no one, except execs, was really sure what was happening. Things just felt off. We had this one guy, fresh out of college, doing everything he could to fast track his way up the executive ladder. He was a complete douchebag too. I'm talking stereotypical douchebag. If the part was going to be written for a movie, it would be this guy, probably played by Jeremy Piven. If Jeremy Piven was about 5 feet 3 inches and had hair like Gilderoy Lockhart. Yeah, he was short to very short. He was always the loudest in the room. The guy that was way too serious about throwing elbows and calling fouls at the daily lunchtime pickup basketball game. We are talking a Nimitz class douche canoe here. Anyway, this guy got under everyone's skin. He made the mistake of burning a few bridges with the infrastructure team. Now to be clear, the infrastructure team was badass. Great group of guys. They were all ex-Air Force and had essentially been hired on as a group. One guy got hired as the lead slot and put together his team from men and women he served with. Top-notch group of people. Well, unbeknownst to everyone, Jackass apparently gave his 2-week notice. Part of this process was letting leadership know, and this included the infrastructure team, so they could start winding down access, collecting equipment, etc. Edit. For clarification, the resignation was confidential. So, when Dick Back had a week left, he sent out this long email to the entire goddamn company. He proceeded to praise the exec team and completely excoriate everyone in the it section, saying we were all unprofessional and that the state of the company could be laid at our feet. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this was a large .com in 2000. The id team was not insignificant. This email went out and we all read it. I honestly thought it was a mistake. I mean, he was junior level at best and had no real reason to even complain about anyone. Not directly anyway. This just isn't how it was done. The head of the infrastructure saw this and hit a reply all to that email and said simply, hey, little guy, why even bother? You handed in your resignation last week. You could head a collective ooh on the floor when it hit everyone in box. 15 minutes later, there was a recall notice from the head of infrastructure. 45 minutes later we received a company-wide email that the head of infrastructure was no longer with the company. 30 minutes after that emails started filtering in from the rest of infrastructure. They were all resigning. Edit 2. The little shit apparently made a big stink over this. I do not exactly have the details, but rumor had it he went 2 hours and threatened legal action since his resignation had been publicly outed. By the end of the day, there was no one left over there, not a single person. That was the beginning of the end. It was glorious to watch. It took me about 2 weeks, but I, along with many others, found another job and GTFO. I had a co-worker who would be on her phone planning her weekends like none of us could hear her. It would include her not coming into the office on Friday. She wouldn't request the day off. She would call out almost every week. Our manager didn't sit nearby, so she didn't hear this, but since we all had to pick up her slack when she wasn't in, her constant calling out pissed us off. After all of our complaints, our manager noticed the pattern and finally told her that she couldn't take PTO until she had earned it. First week of the new year, she called out on a Friday. The next Monday, Bowers was waiting for her when she came in. They had a meeting, and she was escorted from the building.